Welcome to the Bible class of Jews for Jesus. We're studying the 23rd chapter of the book of Acts tonight, Acts 23. Paul in front of the Sanhedrin for just a moment. And then he's going to be out, and then he's going to be in. He's going to leave Lysias and get over to Felix by the end of the chapter. There's a lot of motion and a lot of commotion, as is typical of the apostle in conflict. What I want you to see is the courage of the apostle, some of his humility, and what God does to lead us in our lives. It's not all smooth sailing, but it's all sailing. And the good thing is we can count on Him to take us where we need to go. A lot of motion, a lot of commotion. This is constant with the Apostle Paul, and it always seems not only to be in his life, but if you are following the same Yeshua, it'll be attending your life as well. I don't understand. Maybe it's a product of some 1950s television show. Maybe it's a product of some song we learned in our youth, that everything is supposed to be all good all the time. And that if you really love the Lord, you'll have smooth sailing. That's just not the way it was for the apostle. It's not the way it was for Stephen. It's not the way it was for Yeshua. Why should it be so for you? Here's Paul. He's been longing to come to Jerusalem. They warned him that when he came, they tied themselves they were up in knots about predicting what was going to happen. Sure enough, he's brought before the council. He's already had one conversation in front of them, and then he was spared, thankfully. Now he's brought forth, and we'll just take a look back at the end of chapter 22 and see how it ended last week. Those listening online have the pleasure of backing up and listening to last week's message, but we're stuck with tonight all by ourselves. There were people who were examining Paul, and that means they were beating him to the edge of his life with that special whip. It wasn't just a whip, it had the stones in it, much like they used on Yeshua. And Paul interrupts this beating to find out more information, much like they do in interrogation in Iraq or in Guantanamo Bay. And he said, hey, can you do this? Because I'm a Roman. Yipes! It was discovered that he was a Roman citizen, not by birth, but from birth. You're not born a Roman citizen. In other words, his father had bought citizenship some time back, born in Tarsus, and the commander is embarrassed, Lysias is embarrassed, because he had to purchase his citizenship. Yipes, if I do this to this fellow, I'm going to be in trouble. So he wanted to know what was the real deal. At verse 30, we see, on the next day, wishing to know for certain why he'd been accused by the Jews, he ordered the chief priests and council to assemble. And I can see Lysias there saying, okay, boys, let's have another conversation. I want to know why you are so upset. What did he do wrong? After all, he's thinking, Paul is a Roman. And what did Romans ever do against you people? So that's now going on in Lysias' mind, the commander's mind. He's probably wanting to justify himself and all of Rome. Much like if I said something against your side's football team when they're going up against some other country, or your prime minister against that prime minister, or your most important citizen against my most important. So you get the idea. There's something going on in Lysias that says, hey, you don't have anything on one of my boys. All of a sudden now Paul is one of his boys. So Paul gets up to make his defense in front of the Sanhedrin. Paul is there not really to defend himself. What's he there for? To bear witness to God, to preach the gospel. That's why he came. That's all Paul exists for, is to use whatever he can, his own testimony or whatever, which he shared last week, or anything, to proclaim the good news of Jesus. That's what he's about. And if you get distracted, you will find comfort in other things. But if you want comfort in that, you're going to have some topsy-turvy times. So here we have it tonight. Paul looks intently at the council. You get a picture that before he addresses them, he stares at them one by one. He's making sure and some of these fellows he's been with. Remember, he's been in front of them before. When was the last time Paul was there? Way back in chapter 8. With Stephen, and he's there going along with the issue of throwing rocks and ruining Stephen's life. he's on par with them at those days. Today, he's far different than them. But in those days, they were colleagues and in cahoots about destroying the way, Haderech, the way, that is, these followers of the Nazarene. He looks intently at them and probably gives them an eye, saying, I remember you. You and I, we hung out together at Gamaliel's house. Remember, we had pizza, falafels, whatever. So there's some kind of camaraderie that he's expressing in his intention, as well as readying to charge them with complicity to ruin Christ's name. There's something going on as he looks intently. We see that in one of the Gospels at the time in Luke 22, as Yeshua is there in the Garden of Gethsemane. And it says, after the cock crows, the Lord turned and looked at Peter. And Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he told him, before a cock crows today, you'll deny me 3 times. This look that Yeshua gave Peter after he had denied the Lord 3 times was so compelling and scary to the Apostle Peter. Sometimes they say a father or mother can look at a child, and if looks could kill. Yesterday I was handing out gospel tracts on Carlisle Street, Balaclava, and I had a terrific time meeting with and conversing with Jewish people of all sorts, Israelis, Russians, Aussies, local comedian heroes, all kinds of folks. And this lady came up to me just at the end, 50-year-old lady, Jewish lady, comes up to me. I had seen her across the street in a coffee bar while I was talking to a couple. I'm slowly walking away, and she comes up to me and says, I have to get one of your flyers. I said, oh, yeah, sure. And I looked at her and said, were you the lady over there in the coffee? She said, yes. I was watching. Everyone's looking at you, and I was amazed. People would walk by with such scorn and derision at my T-shirt, Jews for Jesus, or the flyer, or just my being out there. And yet, friends, don't get such a view of the Jewish people of Melbourne. 6 Jewish people gave me their names, addresses, and telephones, keen, wanting to hear more about Yeshua. And that is probably the biggest, how shall I call it, netting that I've ever had on one particular sortie, that is a tract passing expedition, ever in my time in Australia. And yet, in the midst of that good response, this lady from the coffee bar came over and said she wanted to testify to me that she saw such horrid responses by some people who gave me that look. Oh, by the way, she was one of the 6 who gave me her name and details for further follow-up. So never be despising the disgruntlement of people. Don't be so, well, nobody's listening to me, kind of like Eeyore, and it's a bad day. Because if you want to experience the pleasure of people actually listening to you, you have to cop the displeasure of people rejecting you. That's what Yeshua understood. That's what the Apostle Paul understood. So here he looks intently at the council. He says, Brethren, that's not the way to address the Sanhedrin. Hey, boys, it's not the way you address them as Peter and John did in Acts chapter 4. Rulers of the people, elders, prominence, you'd say your majesty or your exaltedness or your high holiness. I mean, whatever you want to call them. You don't say, hey, boys. You don't say, hey, how's it going, boys? And brethren, like we're mates. Hey, mate. That's really what he's saying. That's going to get them so upset. I've lived my life with a perfectly good conscience before God up to this day. By the way, the Greek word here is agape, perfectly loving conscience before God up to this day. This made him so upset. Ananias, the high priest, he's been the high priest. They had a rotation of high priests. Here he is. We know the high priest was John at one point, Caiaphas at one point. Here he is, Ananias. So Ananias, not the same one we saw introduced, the one who led Paul in the prayer as Paul became a believer back in chapter 9. But no, this is another Ananias of the same mishpacha of Caiaphas and John. Orders Paul to be slapped. Well, you don't do that in a court of law. There's no justice in that. That's just outside a pub. That's demeaning. Why is he so upset? After all, Paul's supposed to make a defense. He's supposed to explain. And Lysias is there to listen, to figure out why there's such a charge against him. So why does Ananias interrupt the thing?
He wants to show Lysias that the Jewish assembly is really holding Paul in contempt.
Okay. He's saying that this fella isn't even worthy to be heard.
Yeah, something like that.
He's contemptible.
Yeah.
And after all, the high priest appointed by Rome, the Macher, the guy in charge of the temple, has to be in good relation with the government. Maybe so. Other opinions? So Ananias is feeling demeaned. Okay, I'll show you, buddy. You call me buddy, you're no buddy of mine. Okay, maybe so, but why was he blaspheming? Smack his mouth, not smack his back, not smack his knees, smack his mouth, because the mouth was where he'd been communicating the gospel.
He doesn't want him to talk.
Yeah.
He wants him to keep quiet.
So his blood, starts dripping there. You can imagine. Yeah. God has authorized me to do what I'm doing. You boys haven't. I'm going on with God, not with you. In other words, God and me, we're trumping you. You're wrong, I'm right. You hear it? No wonder he slaps him in the mouth. This phrase, perfectly good conscience, not the same, is used in chapter 24. We'll see that next week. Again, an appeal to the resurrection of the dead, to which he is in good, clean conscience in his proclamation. They're upset at him because, as you say, he's preaching the gospel. They're also upset at him. What they bring him up on charges about? Really, it was about the fellow that he was supposed to have brought into the temple, the Greek fellow. And he was the one. And he didn't uphold our law. It's not deserving death, that's for sure. Okay, so the high priest slaps him, and Paul says, God's going to strike you, you whitewashed wall. Whoa, is that a quick response? Is that a holy... Well, let's see. He blasphemed. Who else had called somebody whitewashed?
Jesus called the Pharisees.
Whitewashed tomb. What's a whitewashed tomb?
It means repainted.
It's white, and then out originally they're painted to warn people that there's a dead thing inside, because you're not allowed to accidentally touch a place where there's death. So Yeshua says of the Pharisees who were in charge that day, you're all a bunch of whitewashed tombs. There's a sign on you that says you're containing death in there. You look alive, you're not alive. Well, boom! Paul blasts back with this same phrase, you whitewashed wall. You deserve death, you pig. I mean, he is so angry at him. And do you sit to try me according to, get this, your law? Paul's always called it the law of Moses or the law of God. Now he says it's your law. He's distancing himself from the priesthood of that fellow. And in violation of the law, see, Mosaic law, God's law, you strike me. How dare you? Some of the guys around said, what are you doing? That's the high priest. You revile God's high priest? He said, I didn't know that was the high priest. Now, did he know or did he not know?
No, he didn't know.
That's what it says. He didn't know, but what do you think?
Following on from
whitewashed wall. That's right. Oh, I didn't know you were the high priest. If you were, you wouldn't have acted like that. So he's biting. He's sarcastic. Some say he didn't know, that he couldn't see. That whole thing about Paul being frail in eyesight. I don't know that I buy that. Maybe a wrong time of day that he couldn't see. I think they're looking for an excuse by which he is able to say, honestly, I couldn't tell. But I think he's much more derisive here. I wasn't aware, brothers. Again, the word brothers. I mean, it's so clear he's demeaning them or raising us all to the same level. That he was a high priest, for it is written, you shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people. In other words, I wouldn't do that if I knew he were the high priest. Others that I've read, commentators say that he's actually apologizing at this point. Oh, if I'd have known that was the high priest, I wouldn't have called him a whitewashed tomb. I am really sorry. That's what he's saying. And some agree with that. I have no problem with his biting, sarcastic, mean, angry response. He is human after all. I have no problem with his apology if that's what this is. Saying, I'm sorry, if I'd have known, I wouldn't have. I hear it more in line with, if he were really the high priest, he shouldn't have talked to me like that. Then if that be so, then he really is apologizing. That I'm okay with. He's not apologizing for what he believes. He's not apologizing for the declaration of the gospel. He's apologizing for a mistreatment of a ruler of the people. Okay, I can live with that. Then he sees that, of course he knows this, Luke is helping us poor people later on, verse 6 and following, with the split in the Sanhedrin between Pharisees and Sadducees, which Yeshua did earlier as well. And he splits the crowd. In verse 7, the assembly's divided. Verse 6, he saw that, and he divided the crowd. Paul always identified as a Pharisee. He's 20 years already a believer. He's a Jewish believer in Jesus, and in verse 6 he says, I am a Pharisee. He doesn't say I used to be or I grew up one. I am a Pharisee. That's the political party. That's the religious devotion I maintain. Yes. He's not saying I used to be Jewish, now I'm a Christian. He's saying I am a Jew, I'm a Pharisee, I'm one of those identifiable people. And my pop was too. I'm a son of Pharisees. My yichus goes way back. So this is not a nouveau thing. I didn't convert and then I became and now so I could join you guys. Not at all. This is part of my DNA. I'm on trial for the hope and resurrection of the dead. Who's he talking about? What's he talking about? What's he on trial for? This is it. It's the resurrection of Yeshua, the dead one who's the risen one, the Prince of Life. Now he's putting it in the context of the argument that the Pharisees and the Sadducees had, which was that there is no resurrection because that's not so clear in the Older Testament. The Sadducees are more like you than you think. The Sadducees believed in the Bible and only the Bible. They didn't believe in rabbinic interpretation of the Bible. That's what later became known as the Talmud. The Sadducees believed what the Bible said. And it's kind of hard, unless you have the information we have from the Newer Testament, to find resurrection of the dead in the Older Testament. It's not so clear. We know it from the book of Job. We know it from the Psalm 16 that the Apostle Peter used in Acts chapter 2 on Pentecost. We know it from a couple other hints here and there. Yeshua certainly used the burning bush to declare the resurrection. I was the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I'm the God of the living, not the God of the dead. So Yeshua used the idea of resurrection from Torah. He was able to bring it forward from Torah. But they're hints. They're not so clear. They're not as clear as you're saved by grace through faith. That's pretty clear. We can get that. We know the names of certain characters. I can get that very directly from the scriptures. But this idea of resurrection is clear to us who live on this side of the Newer Testament and the ministry and role of Yeshua. But before Yeshua, it wasn't so clear. We are more like Sadducees than Pharisees. In light of, if the Bible says it, I believe it, that settles it. I don't need to find David Stern's book or Bob Mendelsohn's audio tape to find something provable and true. Well, Bob said it, that must be good. You're not like that. You believe it because the Bible says it. You with me on that? And notes are notes, but they're not Bible. Cho Youngie said something. That's great, but where is it in the Bible? You want to know what it says in the Bible. That's Sadducean, not Pharisaic. The Pharisees gave us the Talmud. And yet, the Sadducees, verse 8, say there is no resurrection. Whoops, that's not right. No angel. Well, wait a minute. No spirit. Wait a minute. But the Pharisees do. So in that regard, the Pharisees were right, and the Sadducees were wrong. So there's a great uproar, argued heatedly. I love that. Verse 9. And so the Pharisees stood up and said, we like this boy. He's one of us, right? We find nothing wrong with this man. What if a spirit or an angel has spoken to him? In other words, they're saying, we were right. It's not really about Paul. It's about them. They think they're on trial. Well, they're not going to go down with the ship. They're saying, we're good. He must be good. What a backwards way of running things. All right. So a great dissension developed. The commander was afraid Paul would be torn to pieces by them. So he said, troops, get down there. Take him away and bring him back into the barracks. What a scene. What an exciting scene. But I think Paul's a little disappointed. I know he wanted to divide the troops. He wanted to divide Pharisees and Sadducees. But he didn't really get to say what he wanted to say. He wanted to share the gospel of Yeshua. But he'll have to say, well, I don't know. Was that a good day or not? I'm happy with what I did in Melbourne yesterday. I'm happy with the response of the people with whom I spoke. I wanted to talk to more. And maybe that's the way Paul felt. I did okay. Wouldn't it have been good if I could have just opened up Isaiah 53? I should have liked that a lot more. Well, okay. Thank God I'm here. I'm in the barracks. I've got a good night's sleep. I've got a good meal. Okay, I'll be here. End of that story. Verse 11. During the night, immediately following, God stands by his side and says, courage, take courage, take courage, which means it's there in the room next to you. It's hanging in the closet. Grab some courage, put it on. Feel like the Tin Man or the Lion. There it is. As you've solemnly witnessed to my cause at Jerusalem, you must witness at Rome also. In the same way that you witnessed, that's got to make him feel good. Hey, you witnessed for me, babe. You did a good job. You did it. You're not done. You're going on to Rome, and you're going to do it there. So in a way, Paul, who might have been kicking himself, why did I do that, is hearing an affirmation from heaven. That's great. And if ever you do, when you do, share the good news with other people. Later on that night, don't you feel good? Don't you hear some kind of heavenly, hey, good on you, matey. There's something in there. Even if you didn't do everything you wanted to do. Sometimes God is okay and gives us this thumbs up. It's not as everything as you wanted, but good on you, mate. But that's not the end. You've witnessed there in Jerusalem. Buckle your seatbelt. You're going to Rome. He's dreamed about going to Rome. He also dreams about going to Spain. Paul gets to go to Rome. He's a Roman citizen. That's kind of neat. But he's going to get to go and witness. He's not just going to go on a holiday. He didn't study the travel brochures when he was there in Miletus. He wanted to get to Rome to proclaim the gospel. That's the drive of the apostle. That is the passion of the apostle. And it's affirmed by God in the past tense what you did, and it's affirmed in the future tense you're going to do some more. Now this is good news, because remember, Agabus wrapped himself in the rope and said you're going to be bound there in Jerusalem. So what Paul is hearing is, it ain't over. No fat lady sang. You're going on. This is not your end. You're in the barracks here in Jerusalem, in the fortress of Antonia, but it's not over. They're not going to come in and swarm you, take you, kill you. Don't worry. You're going to Rome. Man, is that good. It's especially good in light of the next happening that occurs. It was day, and the Jewish people formed a conspiracy. There are 40 of these guys who bound themselves under this oath. They formed a plot. They said, here's what we're going to do. We're going on a hunger strike like that fella did up in the poll about the farm down in Victoria, wasn't it? 53 days. I'm not going to eat. And he didn't. All he had was water. Have you ever gone on a long fast? 2 weeks, 3 weeks, anybody? You have to have water after 3. You can't go without, I don't think, Dr. Bob. I don't think you can. I've gone on a very, very long fast, weeks. And you cannot survive without water. But this fella only had water down there in Victoria, and he was doing it for his farm, and he had a purpose, and I guess he got heard. He got the newscast last night, that's for sure. Well, these 40 didn't exactly want it to be known on the news. They said, we're going on a hunger strike. And then they did this crazy thing where they said, here, we're going to go to the Sanhedrin and reveal our plot to kill the Apostle Paul. Now, if you're the Sanhedrin, what's your responsibility towards Jewish people?
To defend them.
I would say, was Paul a Jew? And therefore, what is their responsibility? When you think about it, they shouldn't be the ones to whom a plot would come and they would sit back privately and say, oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, you guys carry it on. They should be, wait a minute, you can't do that to one of our boys. Especially the Pharisees who just defended him, who were there in the Sanhedrin. They should have said, hey, no, you can't do that. He's one of our boys. He wears our team colors. You can't do that. His grandpa and my grandpa, they all hung out together there in Cilicia. You just can't do that. But for some reason, these 40 not only felt the liberty to communicate, they felt the assurance that they would be maintained in privacy and get done what they wanted to do. So these fellows bound themselves under an oath, said they wouldn't eat or drink until they'd killed Paul, which turns out to be a pretty long time. Months and years and years. I don't know if they really maintained that oath, and they didn't even kill him. They came to the priests, elders, the big shots, and said, we've done this, we've made a vow. Hear that. Beginning of their quote in verse 14, we've bound ourselves under a solemn oath to taste nothing. I'm sure these guys are thinking, wow, I wonder what this vow is. They just sound like reasonable guys. They've come to the leaders of the Jewish community and said, we've made a vow. A solemn oath. We're not going to taste anything. We're not going to eat. This is a very holy group. Until we've killed Paul. Whoa, wait a minute. Somebody should have red flagged that and said, I don't think that's exactly what vow and holy and kill are not in the same sentence. Therefore, you and the council notify the commander. Here's our plot. So, leaders, notify the commander. Okay, so hear that phrase, you and the council, verse 15. Obviously now they've gone to some select members of the Sanhedrin from whom they expected to hear positive things. So they went to the weak links.
Probably the Sadducees?
You got to bet they're Sadducees. They are not the Pharisees, because the Sadducees just came out looking bad in the squabble. So they went to some of the Sadducean council members and said, hey, we need some help to go up against the Pharisees, some of the people in the leadership. Notify the commander, bring him down to you. As so it looks like you still have some more questions to ask. A little bit more investigation. And we're ready to slay him. We're going to ambush him. Now, verse 16 says, Paul's nephew is in the mob. How's Paul's nephew there? We know nothing of the family. He might be training like in Gamaliel's school, like his uncle did. Good. It's a holiday. They might be down visiting from Tarsus. He might be a believer. He might be one of the mob who now gets a conscience. All of these are interesting possibilities, but we don't know. The son of Paul's sister heard of their ambush. He came and entered the barracks and told Paul. he's run in and he tells his uncle. Is that a conscience thing? I think so.
Yeah.
Is it because he's a believer or not believer? We don't even know, but at least family affection is pretty good.
Yeah.
And you can't knock it. I've been, since 2004, when my own mom passed away and my dad 10 months later, noticing with clarity the reality of family pain among believers and unbelievers. And it's a hard one. I mean, your family is aging. We're all aging. But when a family member who for so long doesn't want to hear from us because we're believers, somebody's dying of cancer and we go there, all of a sudden things are good. All of a sudden it's okay. We didn't like each other for the last 18 years, but come here and let's hug. Because at the end of the day, in the Jewish world, all you've got is family. And that blood is thicker than water. Blood is thicker than repulsion. Blood is thicker than faith. So it might be that Paul's nephew is a member of this mob who just cannot turn on his uncle. I've seen that in so many people in the last few years. There are stories right now in Jews for Jesus land among some of our people in New York and in Brooklyn who have family members who are literally dying of cancer and other things, who have repelled their sibling or nephew or uncle and who now say, oh, come on, let's hang out together. And I don't want to hear about your Jesus, but come on, we're family. And I love that. I love the whole idea of mishpacha. Well, it might be that.
The other day I had lunch with my uncle and I preached to him. And I thought he would never invite me to a lunch date. And he told me to come to lunch with him. But we never spoke a thing about religion. He didn't say his side and I didn't say my side. We just had lunch and that was it. But we were family.
That's it. And next time, who knows how many people he's told, I don't know, what's wrong? Ezra didn't bring up religion. I know he wanted to talk about Jesus. And who knows how much further that actually went than that if you'd had the conversation.
I didn't want to make him angry. You know what I mean? I didn't want him to...
Depends who's paying.
Yeah, he's paying.
Just don't ever sign a contract that says, I won't bring it up unless you do. Some people in families will say, look, I'm tired of your religion.
Yes.
Joey, don't bring it up.
Yes.
If you bring it up, we'll never talk again. Oh, okay, I'll never bring it up. Don't ever do that. Don't say, I won't bring it up, because you will regret it. In due course, there will be a day you say, I want to talk about it, I can't, because of the integrity of your own commitment and verbiage. Don't sign such a contract. All right, Paul's son, comes, enters the barracks, tells Paul. Paul says, you, prison guard. Now, you get the picture of a prison. Here's Paul locked away. He's not locked away. He's in a place, but he's not. It's minimum security prison. He's there. He's not going anywhere. So he calls one of the centurions, a guy who's in charge of 100 soldiers, and says, hey, take this young fellow up to the commander. He's got something to report. And the guy does it. It might be that Paul, who is a Roman citizen, has more clout than this centurion. It might be that Lysias has said, hey, whatever this guy asks for, you give it to him. Because Lysias doesn't want it known that Lysias, had almost beat the fella. Remember, Cicero and others have said, if you do that, you're the worst soldier. You're worthy of death. It's a crime worthy of death. So whatever he wants. So the commander takes him to this. He takes the fella, takes this nephew. We don't even know his name, and he reports, Paul the prisoner called me to him, asked me to lead this young man to you. He's got something to tell. The commander took him by his hand, stepped aside. What is it? What is it? I mean, you get a real sense of privacy. And what? Did I mistreat Paul? Don't tell anybody. He doesn't know who the fella is. It's my nephew. He began to inquire of him privately. What is it you have to report to me? He said, well, the Jews have this plot, and so don't listen to them. More than 40 of them are lying in wait. They're going to ambush him. And they said they're not going to eat or drink, as if that's going to impress you, until they slay him. And now they're ready and waiting for the promise from you. So the commander says, okay, here's the plan. Don't tell anybody that you've told me this. which makes me think that he's part of the 40. He called to him 2 of his centurions and said, I want you to get 470 guys and go for a trip. It's nighttime. 470 guys, I want you to go on a trip. So they got their mounts together, put Paul on it, and I want you to take him to Felix, the governor, who's up 65 miles away. That's 100 kilometers away in Caesarea. Jerusalem is not the capital in those days of the Roman province. Caesarea is.
You mean 270, not 400.
Look at it in verse 23. Get 200 soldiers ready to proceed to Caesarea with 70 horsemen and 200 spearmen. 200, 70, and 200. That is a lot of folks to guard one fellow. But how many are really going? 471. Who's really our protector? The Lord God is our rear guard. So Paul knows, babe, you can send me with 1, you can send me with 500, doesn't matter. God's going to protect me because God's told me I'm going to Rome. And Caesarea, that's on the road. I'll go there. Thanks. See? So here's the plan. He writes a letter and having this form. And the quotes are pretty amazing to me. I don't know if Paul heard this letter read on arrival at Felix and told Luke later, or if Luke actually has a copy of the letter. One or the other, it's true. Claudius Lysias, to the most excellent Governor Felix. This isn't exaggerated. I don't know what is, but it's consistent with Roman correspondence in the day. Greetings. When this man was arrested by the Jews, not when Paul was arrested, but this man, obviously he's going to be attending the letter, was arrested by the Jews, about to be slain, I came upon them with the troops, and I rescued him. Oh, most noble Lysias, thank you, grand as you are. Having learned that he was a Roman. Yeah, when did you learn that? When did you learn it? After you'd authorized the beating, buddy. What's wrong with it? But boy, does Claudius Lysias make himself look better in this letter. This is revisionism, instant revisionism. And I wanted to ascertain the charge. That's true. For which they were accusing him. I brought him down to their council. I found him to be accused over questions about their law. We remember that, don't we? This question about bringing the Gentile into the temple and saying things against the temple and not maintaining legal observance. But under no accusation deserving death or imprisonment. When I was informed that there would be a plot against him, I sent him to you at once. Which is his way of saying, I don't want to deal with these people. It sounds so noble. It sounds so honorific. It's really, I wash my hands of this guy. Do you hear it? And I instructed his accusers to bring charges against him before you. Now, we don't know when that really happens, but the soldiers, in accordance with their orders, took Paul, brought him by night to Antipatris. Now, if it were a car, it wouldn't take very long, but they're on horses. They're going 45 miles, 65K. I don't know how long that took, but a good long time. The next day, some of the folks split. So the horsemen went on with him up to Caesarea, another 20 miles. And the other folks went back to the barracks, back there to Jerusalem. Okay, you get the scene? It's a split group. And when they came to Caesarea and delivered the letter to the governor, they presented Paul to him, which makes sense because this man is reported, there he is. Okay, Felix reads it. He says, where are you from? He says, Cilicia, which is where Tarsus is. He said, when the boys come who have the accusation, I'll listen. And so he sticks him in Herod's praetorium, puts him in the jail. Felix is well known as a wicked man. There are so many people who wrote about him in history as being a wretched guy. They used the phrase that he ruled like a governor but had the spirit of a slave, which is a person who wanted vindication for making him a slave. He ruled with an iron fist, we would say, in modern days. He was an evil, evil governor, proconsul over Jerusalem. So he's not the kind of guy you really are hoping for to be in charge of your judicial system. You're hoping for justice from heaven, not from him. But Paul hears this. He's standing in front of him. He hears the letter read and says, I'm going on to Rome. Felix, you're just a pawn in this thing. We don't know what's going to happen. That's next week. The Jewish leadership rocks up, and Paul has to address both Felix and the rest of the people and ask the questions that I try to ask that makes you think what's really going on and who's dealing with what in the story. And what must these 470 fellows have thought that Paul was? 470 people, 200 of whom are spearmen. They're the offense. What must they thought Paul was? Why would you protect him? Who's Paul? 470 guys must have thought he was what?
He could cause a riot or rebellion or something like that. People might follow him, and maybe he might stir the crowd up.
Oh, so you're thinking he was a dangerous man.
Yeah, a dangerous man.
So 470 guys were protecting the Roman world from Paul. What else might it be? Remember, they're sent because of a plot. Well, if there's 40 who've addressed something in an ambush setting, these 470 are informed about that. Boys, be on your guard when you cross over near Tel Aviv. There are some people who are out there who don't like Paul. These are the Asian Jewish people. These aren't Jerusalemites, I don't think, who've stirred up the crowd. These are the boys back from Asia Minor. We've seen them for lots of years as they've followed Paul around wherever he went and ministered. They've riled the crowds up.
That's what I'm saying. Paul, they were afraid that the people in wait for him might be so much, more than 40, that there would be like a civil rebellion because of him. So that's why they had so many people protecting him.
It's just amazing to me that there are 400, I think 500 fellas with full armor. You know, they're rocking up into a pretty, of course people are used to seeing military travelers on one of the 4 Roman roads through Israel. From Jerusalem up to Caesarea, it's a well-traveled military road. Be like near Duntroon. You're going to find certain military roads where the tanks and the horsemen and airplanes fly over, military planes, you know, that we see in modern days. Oh yeah, there goes another military plane. You know, up by Richmond Air Force Base. You hang out up there, you're going to the markets or you're playing golf or you're up there for near the Windsor, you know, up there just for a weekend something. And you look up, you hear a plane, you know it's going to be military. The people on these routes are used to military presence. But 500 fellows, that's a huge bunch of folk ready. And I don't know that they would have seen, certainly not at night, they wouldn't have been able to see, oh look, there's one guy who doesn't fit in, kind of like that Sesame Street song. One of these is different than the others. Which one is it? And it was the Apostle Paul dressed in different garb. I think that they were protecting him, which I think is fantastic. That Lysias was there to protect him from the ambushing crowds. Yeah. It's wonderful to imagine what attention the Apostle Paul attracted. All the while, he wasn't given to the attraction. Friends, when they give you an opportunity, whether it's on the streets of Carlisle, Balaclava, or the street of Oxford, or the street in your neighborhood, or the street of your family at a gathering, when they give you an avenue, proclaim the gospel. And never be shy about it. Be as courageous as the apostle who always wanted to go and do and preach it. He had humility to admit when he was wrong. He had help from heaven. He had affirmation from heaven. He had the assurance that God was on his side, and he wanted to go and lift up the name of Yeshua. He is so much of an inspiration to me, and this book has been so wonderful to me as I continue to study it and see who he is and what God has been doing in preparing him even before he was born, when his father earned or bought, for whatever reason. Some say Paul's father actually helped in some political or military campaign and was awarded citizenship as a Roman. The history is pretty fuzzy on that, but it's clear that he was and that Paul had it from birth. Even in that regard, the apostle was being prepared for such a time as this. And so look at your circumstances that God has ordained in which you find yourself, whether from Chile or Korea or Australia or wherever, and say, God, you're good. And you want me to step on that platform and proclaim the good news to anyone and everyone, to my own and to those even in Rome, far, far away from home geographically. People of different cultures, people of different backgrounds, people who don't understand my Aramaic, as we saw at the beginning of last chapter. Let's step on the platform God gives us and share the good news in courage. When he said, take courage, friends, it's available. He doesn't say take something that you can't get. He's not teasing you. He doesn't say take an apple pie when there isn't one. He doesn't say take a barbecue beef sandwich. What he says is take the courage that's there. It's readily available. Courage comes from the French word heart, cour. Let heart get in you. Be of good cheer. Be of good courage, Yeshua said in John in his last sermon to the boys on Passover night. Be of good cheer. I've overcome the world. They're going to give you grief. They're going to give you trouble, but take courage. It's available. It's needed, and you can live in it. That's what we need. That's what the apostle lived in. Whether traveling by night with 470 of his closest friends or wondering as he's there in the barracks the night before, why am I in here? What's the reason? My own family rejected me. This is crazy. And then his nephew rocks up and the scene changes so quickly. I don't mind the wondering. I don't mind the question. Be glad when God does the answers, whenever it comes.
You've been listening to the Bible class of Jews for Jesus in Australia. For more information, contact us at Jews for Jesus, Post Office Box 925, Sydney, Australia, 2001. God bless you.